Greetings from Ukraine Crisis Media Center. Now, the community spokespersons project on decentralization of power. This is a joint project, UCMC-DOBRE and DOBRE project on the 1st of April. The reform was adopted on decentralization and reorganization of communities. A lot has been done. First, it was financial decentralization and local budgets. Out of 68 million rose to more than 300 in 2018. And parallel, the state started the transfer the responsibilities in the sphere of land, education, healthcare, and other responsibilities. And in the country, we have the process of voluntary unification of communities and creation of the new format of self-governance. This process is voluntary, and communities, they get united voluntarily. There are small, medium-sized, and big communities. Today, we are going to speak with the big communities. And today we are going to find out why they have broad opportunities for the development of their territories. So we have our guests. So we invited the head of Tsarychanska amalgamated community, Hennadiy Sumskyi, and head of Zborivska amalgamated community, Ruslan Maksymiv. First, background for those who listen to us. Tsarychanska community was created in 2016. It united 5 councils, 23 settlements, and 15,000 people. And Zborivska community was created a year later in 2017, and it got united 16 councils. This is 38 settlements and 16,000 population. So your communities are similar in size. For the start, I would like to ask you, why did you get united? Hennadiy, we start with you. First of all, I would like to say that we didn't like the lack of funding before and lack of material basis. That's why we decided to get united. We understood the prospects of the new law on decentralization. That's why we decided to do so. But were you threatened that your settlements will die off and something will bad happen to you, and certificates won't be provided? No, we do not afraid of this. So central settlement prosper, and all others join and also prosper. So, and what was your reason? Why did you get united? Did you have a bad situation in Zboriv? No, we have not a bad situation, but we decided to get united because this is the right position of the state, that the community should get united, because those who are not the part of community, they do not understand these problems. And we knew that we lack roads, asphalt, water supply. We had problems with culture, healthcare, medicines, and the local government couldn't deal with it. And then we started to be a community. We started to accept these educational and healthcare facilities, and there are many problems. And during first year that we work, maybe people didn't notice it, but a lot has been done. So a heating system was repaired, there was a reorganization of some institutions, and this requires expenditures, and savings should be made in order to promote the development of communities. So your communities were created in order to provide better life to people. People wanted to live better. You are working in 3. You're working in new conditions during 3 years, and you live in new conditions during 2 years. But Was it a mistake or was it correct? What did decentralization provide to your communities? So I would like to speak with the figures. So the overall budget increased 4 times, and this provided us with opportunity to have more money in the villages. It gave the opportunity to use our money. This is first. Second, we have many common problems. This is problems with education, with healthcare, and jointly it is better to resolve these problems. And what about you? What did decentralization provide? So first of all, this is the funds that we can get. Those communities are helped by the state. The state allocates the money for the development of community, and we had 4.7 million were allocated to us by the state, and we got a lot of support from the People's Deputy, Taras Yurik, and he supports us in different projects and help us to get this money. And also we have grant programs. We participate in these programs, for example, in DOBRE program. And this provides big opportunity to attract additional funds for our community. So I wanted to speak about the money later, but I would like to speak about it now because you've mentioned it.
It's at the level of 7 to 8%, and you are at the 60 and something place out of 664 communities in Ukraine. Your indicators are good, and I know that at Tsarychanski district there are smaller communities where which are subsidized much higher at a 30% level. Their budgets are subsidized, but given the number of the villages you have 24, you have 35, 38 rather villages. Why do you need that level of subsidies? Well, for smaller communities, the smaller communities, they live only from the revenues raised through the taxes, local taxes, and if a local enterprise terminates its work, it's a big blow for any small community. The community needs to accumulate some funds in order to finance its programs, and certainly, yes, it's understandably it's their own decision. Well, as was rightly mentioned, a bigger community has better means and ways of planning their development. For example, in a smaller community, we can have some schools that are not economically viable, and whose maintenance is not economically viable, and children should be transferred to some other schools. And in smaller communities, this issue of funding is very pressing. For example, if the government transfers some of its authorities and functions to us, then a local community needs to form a education department. But what about the funds? Will these funds be enough to finance the proper education? So the problems are different, but mostly all the communities confront not only the issue of or the problem of funding, but also the problem of human resources, the specialists, and you need the people who would be capable of developing some, development programs for different sectors of your life. So my next question is, how well do you manage to communicate with your public, with the public in your communities? Have you got any problems here? Well, as this famous proverb goes, the human resources are decisive in all respects, and certainly the project DESPRO you lead, the center of the development of local self-government in Dnipropetrovsk have been most helpful. Whether the citizens can hear what we try to communicate to them, it depends on how active they are, how actively they use for example, the internet channels for communication. We have organized, for example, the public reporting of our activities, and we inform the public about what we are doing. But are you physically approached by the members of your community? Yes, certainly. We have the public council. We have also the school pupils councils and some other local public councils. We have done a number of polls, opinion polls, so we are aware of the needs of the members of our communities, and we have also the program of action for the development until 2022. Well, I ask that question so that both I and our listeners and viewers can understand to what extent the local authorities are guided by the opinions and needs of the local community, not by their own wishes or needs. So, for example, in your community you have 38 villages, and each one of them needs a certain attention, and a lot should be done in order to pay some attention to these villages. How do you manage to do that? Well, as you mentioned, we communicate with them, and each village has now its leader. And you raised also a question of the local budgets. At the local level, together with the local councilmen and the leaders of the communities in each village, we have them. And for example, last year, through their efforts, we managed to renovate a number of infrastructure objects that we do not need, will not have to renovate, will not need to renovate in the nearest future. That's the result of effective communication with the leaders of those communities, whether the kindergartens or schools were renovated. In some villages, then in the other villages there is an opportunity to renovate their public institutions or establishments that are used by the local public. I understand. Is the situation similar in your community? When we started negotiating with the villages this idea of enlarging our community, we wrote, so to say, a memorandum of understanding for each village, in which we put the needs of what needed to be done until 2020. So, if we do not manage to abide by our commitments, in 2020 our voters will make their choice respectively. Okay, And if we speak about this improvement and widening of the number of services that you provide to the local communities, let me quote, if I manage the words, some comments about the Tsarychanska community. But anyway, I read from some of the journalists who wrote after visiting your community, wrote the articles about the efforts to improve the quality of education and the other efforts. What's been going on in your community that can't be described as unique, as something that is not done by the other communities in your region, for example? Well, initially we tried to, for example, to hold the contests, the bids for the support of innovations that were developed by some of our local, craftsmen, entrepreneurs. We have, for example, very good teachers who teach the foundation, so to say, of roboto technologies and robotics. But has the situation changed, for example, for the education specialists in your community? Yes, it has been changing. A number of schools has been renovated. Then the salaries were raised for some teachers, and the equipment of some schools. We have quite substantially improved the equipment of our educational establishments, and we have been working on that. Have the level of educational services improved in your community? Yes, I'd say that as in that neighboring community, we have also been trying to support the schools which have better prospects. We try to spend effectively and efficiently the public funds, both from the central budget and from our local budget. We also tried to construct a number of sports sites and playgrounds for the children, so that they could feel some more comfortable conditions rather than idling in the streets, the young people and children, for example. So in this respect, I believe we've been successful. But do you have any, so to say, basic schools, as they are now called? Yes, in our community we do have one basic school, and basis rather school, and 3 more schools that are related to it. But the general premise is that even in the remote villages, the children should have the same access to educational services as they have, as the children from the larger villages or townships have. We have school buses, and we use them. And then we also organized a school children house that is used sort of a club for the school pupils, and we didn't want to, to economize on these objects, infrastructural objects. And I can assure you that our children are educated, their level of education is not inferior to the schools in Dnipropetrovsk, for example, or any other schools from any other regions of Ukraine. My understanding is that at the level of the communities, the educational departments are being established. What do they do? What are they doing now? What are their tasks and functions? Well, the department, education department, functioned in the previous composition of, in the previous structure of our community government. But today, for example, we have created a new department. Their main functions are to oversee the salaries for the teachers. So it's nowadays it's not up to the headmaster of a school, village schools, especially when they were mostly engaged in these attempts to maintain a decent level of income for the teachers. Yeah, in our, for example, in our community, we also have this centralized at the community level, a Department of Education, and we also created a special working group that deals with the equipment of schools, better equipment of schools. So that's what I wanted to clarify, so that the teachers could be free to, to improve the quality of education that they provide to the children. But the administrative body, so to say, should take care of the administrative issues and economic issues. Now, not only the school children, but also the adults should be healthy, should stay healthy, have a healthy way of life. What are you doing in this respect? We have not yet managed to do in this respect. Why? Well, this primary, so to say, tier of this system only started working as a non-profit, on the non-profit basis only from this year, from the beginning of this year, from January 2019. And their main function is the improvement of the equipment, the material basis, so to say, for the educational system. And we allocated 400,000 hryvnias for the acquisition of new equipment, and we also asked for some investment from the local holding MRIA, and they invested some money in order to assist us in these efforts. Well, our situation is a little bit different because we were among the first communities in Ukraine who transferred to direct funding of these establishments, and it happened so that after the opinion polls that we conducted after the amalgamation of our community, 52% of the local residents appeared unhappy with the level of medical services in our community. Therefore, we started to improve the primary tier, so to say, of medical services, and we were among the first 50 communities of Ukraine who started financing directly this area. We are going to have a ceremony of opening of 3 new clinics that were co-financed through the medical or healthcare development programs sponsored by or functioning or executed under the auspices of the President of Ukraine. Also, the salaries have increased because it so happened in the past that when a young medical specialist, a university graduate, would come to our one of our villages, he or she could only be paid not more than 6,000 hryvnias. Now it's about 13,000. Now I have found this quote from a newspaper article that in your community the journalists saw the family doctors looking for the patients at a open-air market of medical services, as it was called. Yes, that there was this sort of exhibition or fair, I would call it, of medical services, and at that fair the residents of our community had an opportunity to sign a contract with a doctor of their liking, and so now we are trying to accumulate some funds at a non-profit fund that we have created in order to improve the funding of the medical services. And the overall result is that the funding increased by 50%, has increased by 50% in the last year after the amalgamation of our community. What else do you do in order to improve the status of the local doctors, because our understanding is that up to 90% of medical services are now provided or are supposed to be provided at the local level, including the diagnostic operations and so on. Well, we managed to offer 12 flats to 12 medical specialists, trying to stimulate their, staying with us in our community. Some of the new clinics are also equipped with 2 bedrooms flats for the local doctors, so we hope that it would stimulate them. Well, this question of the improvement of the medical services has not been tackled by the government for the last for a few dozen years. What's the attitude now of the doctors, medical specialists, because how do they view the prospects of their work and life in your communities, even after that national program of support is stopped? Well, this program, DOBRE, has been effective in both developing a strategy of the development of our community and all its components, all the areas of life in our community. Maybe in the first year there have been no dramatic changes yet, because we focused mostly on the local schools, improvement of local schools and other educational establishments, and that was quite fund-consuming, a business, a matter. But for example, we are now constructing the central heating, equipping with central heating a kindergarten in one of the villages. It's actually my village, and there were 300 meters from the main tube that was conducting hot water to the school, and it was not properly insulated, heat insulated, and it was quite, there were losses because of that. We now are planning to refurbish it, remake it so that it will be more economical. Okay, so your strategies probably include some some goals of, making your communities more attractive. What are you doing in this respect? Well, within this decentralization reform, we were given a number of land plots have been transferred into our ownership, and we are now looking at an opportunity of how to use them better, and how to raise some revenues that could be used by the local budget. For example, there were a number of buildings that were used previously by the collective funds. They were practically dismantled and were staying idle. Nobody have been using them. So we are now trying to start reusing them once again for the purposes of our local budget replenishment. Well, in our community, we certainly have a lot of work. A lot of work remains to be done, and we understand that the assistance from national budget, central budget would stop at a certain time, and so that's why we are trying to do as much as we can in order to find the other sources of financing. For example, last year we opened a new enterprise, Dnipro. This year we are planning to put into operation a new factory that is going to produce asphaltus and different other types of road surfaces, and we hope that the tax revenues would be quite substantial. We have also made an inventory, so to say, of our local enterprises. Therefore, we are now trying to figure out what could be the situation with our local taxes. We have never exerted yet the maximum rates allowed by law, but we are looking at how to optimize the tax revenues. So among the most important areas of development are sports, are economics, or economy rather, and education, medical services. Therefore, I hope that our village, for example, my village, would stand out from amongst the other villages. For example, our village is very old. It's the oldest in Dnipropetrovsk area. It's 450 years old. So we hope to develop tourism as well. You mentioned the tax revenues, and as I know, the local communities can keep up to 60% of the locally raised revenues, locally raised or levied taxes in their local budgets. So you probably are thinking of how to improve the situation with employment in your communities. Yes, as a colleague of mine mentioned, we have also been trying to draw some new investments, and as of today we have all the documentation ready, all the project documents ready for installing and opening and putting into operation of the wind power generators. There's going to be 5 of them in total, and also the recreational facilities, we are looking at them, and we also are planning to improve, or rather to restore the poultry factory that we have. It's going to be another 250 jobs at least. Therefore, we understand that both for us and for the local businesses, the better employment situation means also a better situation for them and opportunities for them. What else are you working on? We are planning to establish a cooperative or a center, as is more trendy to call them now, under the auspices of the Association of Agricultural Entrepreneurs. We are also going to promote tourism. We are going to open a new museum, local museum, and we are going to create some tourist routes in our area. And that would certainly be more jobs, would mean more jobs. It's also important, in my view, to make this system of employment transparent, because in many regions, in many areas, we have the situations when local businessmen are reluctant to pay, salaries for the taxation purposes. In order to optimize their taxation, they are reluctant to pay salaries, so to say, clean salaries, without this shadow payment component. Well, we are trying to find a common language, so to say, with our local entrepreneurs, trying not to fine them, not to put very high taxes. These are the ways for better communication, effective communication, better understanding, mutual understanding of the authorities and the businesses. I remember that you had a meeting, some large-scale meeting with a delegation of German entrepreneurs from Germany. Has it resulted in anything? Yes, there was a visit by the German entrepreneurs, and as of now, they asked us to allocate 2 land plots for them, or a couple of land plots out of 13 that were transferred into our domain, so to say. So this interest to the different plots of land, we know that last year the government decided to transfer under the management of the local authorities the large estates. Has it changed the situation in any way? Well, yes, especially after we became a new amalgamated community, we were also given control of some plots of land out of beyond the boundaries of our villages and townships. And therefore, we are now trying to use these lands so that the revenues could be generated for the local budgets. And a number of land plots we are planning to put at an auction. And so we hope to have there some enterprises that could generate some revenues and hopefully some taxes. Well, in our community, we started working on the better land use, land management, right after we were given new plots of land, and we started to evaluate and assess and develop the best ways of using these lands, but we have not yet been given the authority to use those lands for our own purposes. You can initiate the changes. Well, I can add to this problem of the management of the lands that remain unclaimed. If someone has not inherited that or the other piece of land, yes, that's true. And so today, the law permits to make a contract with a farmer, for example, who has adjacent plots of land. And I understand. Another issue is the quality of the roads. The roads are in a very decrepit condition in many areas. You have already mentioned your efforts in this respect. What are your efforts in this regard? Well, we have 38 villages and fairly, large road network. Their maintenance requires a lot of funding. We started with repaving, resurfacing the streets, the road surfaces in the villages, first of all, inside the villages. And using the funds from the national budget, we bought a grader, auto grader, that can create the certain good profile of a road, good basis for its surfacing. What is your situation as far as the roads are concerned? Well, we have the major part of our road network under the communal services of the community administrations, and also the regional council has allocated, has dispersed a lot of money in the recent years in order to maintain the quality of the roads. And we have managed to make more than 20 kilometers of new roads, hard surfaced roads that will not require any repairments for the next few years. But we still have the problem with the oblast level roads, the larger roads. But can local communities afford at least a few million hryvnias for this road maintenance effort? Well, in our community we have planned the allocation of some funds for the renovation of and restoration of the local roads. We are planning this year to complete 3 sections of roads in our community. May I ask you, because I still have not yet clear impression of whether you are happy with this amalgamation, with this enlargement of your communities or not. If you look back, whether it was worth doing it, how do you view it today, this decision to enlarge the communities? Well, I'd say that it was worth doing it, definitely, and we have touched upon different reforms in different areas, educational services, healthcare. I'd say that some of the doctors have already started getting better salaries. Something else has been done in other areas, education and so on. Certainly some people might be unhappy because some of the jobs are lost. For example, some small schools are shut down. But if we have the situations when some of the children who had studied in local schools cannot read well enough after a couple of years of studying there, then that situation certainly needed to be somehow remedied. Well, in our situation, I'd say that we had analyzed the situation and the effects of decentralization in the other countries, and it was our impression, it had been our impression even before that decision was taken, that the effects were beneficial. And for example, as far as the roads are concerned, we have the plans to renovate some new roads, but I need also to mention the fact that more than 100 million hryvnias have been invested by the region, by the regional authorities into the development of our community. The rank-and-file citizens, they are not interested in the legislation and so on. They are interested to see some effects of the implementation of the reforms and laws. But what are what are your overall impression of the effects of decentralization? Well, I can say that if after this amalgamation of the communities, for example, the roads were resurfaced, the good surfaces were put and restored, and for example the electric lighting appeared in some villages that had not been there for a dozen years or so. The impressions were certainly quite positive. It's the same for our community when, for example, even the closure of some of the kindergartens that some local people were unhappy about, it resulted in the children being transferred to better equipped kindergartens. So I think on balance the positive effects prevail. And certainly, again, it's a matter of better salaries. If the salaries remain low, no efforts could be effective in implementing any efforts to improve the quality of life. And therefore, I think I would say that there is a result, more or less positive result in this respect too. For example, for one of the villages, we increased their budget to 500,000 hryvnias. They didn't have revenues like that, haven't had ever, and so the money came that could be used for the increase of salaries and so on. So we can say that the previously existing local councils, they needed a lot of subsidies, and many of them remain in that condition. But today I think that we have some, so to say, glimpses of hope that as a result of decentralization, financial situation would improve. So my conclusion is that this decentralization reform enabled you to manage your own resources better, first of all. There is no interference from the central level, from the oblast level, and also if we take into account that these reforms, this decentralization has been going on against the backdrop of some clashes and hostilities that Ukraine takes part in. So my question is, in these conditions, was it needed, this decentralization reform? Well, I'd say yes, that, for example, in April of last year, a musical school was transferred under our governance, and we had a meeting with the teachers, and during that meeting most of the teachers were indifferent. Okay, so there are the new authorities, administrative subordination structure has changed, so what? And this year, I'd say that many of them, after their school was renovated, they saw some results of this administrative reform, and that was despite these clashes, these conditions of hostilities. I know that you are doing certain efforts in order to improve the living conditions of the participants of the anti-terrorist organization, as it is called, ATO. Yes, we are planning to put into operation, so to say, to a new house for the participants, or as we call them, the veterans of the ATO. In conclusion, I would like to ask you the following question. According to the polls, 61% of the people who live in the territories of those amalgamated communities, they said that they have felt some positive changes after that amalgamation. Hopefully, another 40%, the remaining 40%, will join them soon. Thank you for your participation in our meeting.